It'd be a pretty boring world if we agreed on everything, right? I mean, watching and discussing movies certainly wouldn't be as much fun without a healthy diversity of opinion. But at the same time, often these lines are drawn so starkly that it's hard to not wonder what the hell some people are thinking. This is especially true of the divide between critics and audiences. For though pundits and the general public tend to agree on the standard of high-quality blockbusters, often there will be a shocking disparity between the tastes of those paid to have an opinion and, well, everyone else. With that in mind, I'm Josh from Whatculture.com, and these are 10 movies that critics and fans just didn't agree on. Number 10, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. The Rotten Tomatoes score, 4.9. The IMDb score, 6.4. Zack Snyder's movies have long since struggled with critics, despite the director having a dedicated following who absolutely dig his style. Batman v Superman, though, was the long-awaited team-up massively anticipated by, well, just about everyone, and hearts were firmly broken when reviews came flooding out, deeming Batman v Superman to be mediocre at best. Alongside its disappointing 4.9 average score on Rotten Tomatoes, it garnered a mere 27% approval rating. Now, in fairness, there was a good deal of fan backlash against BVS as well, but the sway of the hardcore and even some casual viewers shouldn't be discounted. A lot of people just wanted to see Batman and Supes punch each other, a lot of people really dug what Zack Snyder did with these characters and didn't care about the movie's shortcomings. BVS benefited from 20.9% of IMDb user ratings, giving it a 7 out of 10 as well, and it's important to remember that a decent chunk of these voters may have well watched the Ultimate Edition Blu-ray, which is a fairly solid improvement over the theatrical cut. Critics, meanwhile, generally ripped the cinema version apart and moved on with their lives. Number 9. Passengers. The Rotten Tomatoes score, 5.0. The IMDb score, 7.0. Passengers was one of 2016's most anticipated movies, so what a disappointment it was that critics largely dismissed it as a mediocre, if visually impressive, sci-fi romp. Audiences, however, were far more kind to the undeniably alluring pairing of Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence, not to mention the tricksy premise and central romance. Now, it is easy to see why there is such a gulf of opinion between critics and audiences. For instance, many pundits piled on the film for its creepy relationship dynamic between Pratt and Lawrence's characters, and the fact that the story could have had more power if it was slightly restructured. However, there was still a lot of fun to be had in the film. This, combined with the star appeal of the two leads, probably explains why only 0.9% of Passengers' votes are 1 out of 10, while a staggering 32.4% gave it a rather generous 7 out of 10. Again, you can probably split the difference between the critics and audiences to find a far more agreeable middle ground on the movie's quality, though. Number 8. Bad Boys 2. The Rotten Tomatoes score, 4.1. The IMDb score, 6.6. It's no secret by now that critics don't really like Michael Bay, and while their general vitriol towards the Transformers franchise is easy to understand, with Bad Boys 2, it's not so. There is a quite frankly insane 2.5 score disparity between the critical average and IMDb average scores, with the press largely dismissing the buddy cop film as a mindless action fest, while audiences have mostly praised it for those precise same reasons. Hell, there's a reason it became a cult classic so loved for its excess that it became a main feature of the movie Hot Fuzz. Is it grossly overlong at 147 minutes? Absolutely, but is it a lot of fun for most of that duration? Undeniably. It's got insane action, ridiculous dialogue, and Will Smith and Martin Lawrence at the peak of their game, so it's easy to see how audiences generally dug it. Number 7. Warcraft. The Rotten Tomatoes score, 4.2. The IMDb score, 6.7. It's incredibly common that video game adaptations are far more lovingly received by general audiences than critics, largely because fans will enjoy seeing their favorite characters brought to life on screen, and in turn sometimes forgive a lot of potential flaws. Plus, unlike most critics, fans won't need the lore spelled out for them. Still, that's definitely not to say that we're an easily pleased bunch though. I mean, I love Resident Evil, but no amount of references could make me think that Welcome to Raccoon City was a good movie. Warcraft, however, was not a bad attempt at all at a video game adaptation. Casual viewers were seduced by its sometimes good effects, engagement with the World of Warcraft lore, and their general desire to see more of these movies. Critics, however, lambasted the wooden acting and writing, oddly slack direction from Duncan Jones, and the oft ugly visual effects. Now, some fans might call critics biased against video game movies, but it's not like they were massively off the money here. However, in hindsight, it does feel a touch harsh, and it's a shame that despite making decent money, Warcraft will never get a chance to improve with future installments. Number 6, Patch Adams, the Rotten Tomatoes score 4.0, the IMDb score 7.8. Switching from franchise movies for a second, aside from the fact that it's no secret that audiences are far more forgiving of comedies than critics, there's also the trend of moviegoers going easy on personality-driven comedies featuring popular comedians such as Adam Sandler, Jim Carrey, and yes, Robin Williams. Now, Williams is an especially interesting case because most of his best-known comedy films have had decades to marinate with audiences and critics alike. And while a lot of fans still rate them highly due to viewing them in their childhood and growing this connection, a lot of them don't play nearly as well without the rose-colored tint of nostalgia. I mean, take Hook, which rocks a solid 6.7 IMDb score, but just 4.5 with critics. Even more egregious then is Williams' Patch Adams, which remains much loved by many of the late actor's fans, even though it doesn't quite have much to offer outside of Williams' well-meaning performance. Number 5, Equilibrium, the Rotten Tomatoes score 4.8, the IMDb score 7.4. Equilibrium is one of those post-Matrix knockoffs that was awesome if you watched it as a teenager, but in the cold light of adulthood, it's really a mixed bag at best all these years later. Only a mixed bag though, I'm not slating it, it definitely has some good stuff in there. It's just that it does have issues. I mean, Christian Bale's talents are mostly thoroughly wasted in this hilarious, self-serious 1984-inspired action flick, which seemed poised to make Gun Carter the biggest action movie craze since Bullet Time, but ultimately cratered at the box office and now endures as a campy cult classic. So yeah, it's easy to see why critics thought Equilibrium was a jumbled mess imitating countless better sci-fi films, but at the same time, its kitschy B-movie thrill shouldn't be entirely discounted either. After all, there's a reason this movie is so beloved, and that's because you can stick it on in pretty much any situation and then have a good time. Number 4, The Butterfly Effect, the Rotten Tomatoes score 4.8, the IMDb score 7.6. There is definitely a good movie hidden somewhere within this Ashton Kutcher starring time travel thriller, and if you're happy to just switch off your brain, it is pretty entertaining. However, if you subject the movie's time travel machinations to even the slightest sliver of scrutiny, as critics certainly did, then it quickly crumbles apart. And again, it's easy to see how this movie would play well with younger audiences or viewers there more for the vibes and melodrama, likely explaining how a staggering 32.4% of its votes was scored 8 out of 10. Further muddying the waters is the fact that there are numerous versions of the movie out in the wild as well, with far more interesting endings than the rather limp theatrical climax which critics saw. This is definitely one of those cult hits that, yeah, definitely doesn't execute everything it sets out to perfectly, but it does leave you thinking that critics were way too harsh on it. Number 3, Law-Abiding Citizen, the Rotten Tomatoes score 4.3, the IMDb score 7.4. And now we get to the really peculiar ones, those movies that had a more than 3.0 point difference between critical and audience score. If embraced as the goofy, ridiculous, sadistic B-movie that it shamelessly intends to be, Law-Abiding Citizen is a ludicrously enjoyable piece of self-aware trash. Though audiences seem to enjoy the increasingly balmy plot twists and Gerard Butler's scenery-devouring performance, critics largely eviscerated it for those very same reasons. Now, perhaps this gulf of opinion can be explained by the movie releasing during the height of the torture porn craze, which typically repulsed critics at the time, though proved popular with audiences. As such, of all of the movies on this list, it's the one that might be the most deserving of a critical reevaluation, because there's no way in hell this movie is a 2-star effort. Number 2, Collateral Beauty, the Rotten Tomatoes score 3.6, the IMDb score 6.7. If there's one movie genre you can count on to get audiences in while disgusting critics, it's the tear-jerking drama. Such as most Nicholas Sparks adaptations getting a healthy 2 to 3 point score audience boost. Just look at The Notebook, for instance, which rocks a mind mind-bogglingly high 7.9 IMDb average after hundreds of thousands of votes no less, next to a mere 5.7 score from critics. Yet in recent years, nothing has been embraced with as baffling warmth by audiences as 2016's Will Smith starring drama Collateral Beauty. Wildly panned by critics, scoring just a 14% approval rating for its manipulative, overly sentimental, Oscar-baiting tone and weirdly mean-spirited plot twist, audiences nevertheless opened their hearts to the drama. It also doesn't hurt that Will Smith is another actor whose presence and personality alone often boosts the rating of almost any movie he stars in. I mean, see 7 Pounds or Bright as another examples of this. Of course, this was all before, recent events, but you know, the same sentiment still applied for this. Number 1, The Boondock Saints, the Rotten Tomatoes score 4.2, the IMDb score 7.7. And finally, the most egregious discrepancy between critics and audiences goes to Troy Duff's 1999 cult classic thriller, The Boondock Saints. Dismissed by critics as a limp Tarantino knockoff, its charming characters, ultraviolence, and Willem Dafoe nevertheless made it a gonzo hit with audiences, with word of mouth making it a surprise success on home video throughout the early 2000s. Outside of the vacuum of its release period though, audiences have enjoyed The Boondock Saints as a gleefully OTT blast of breezy wit and brutality. Furthermore, the surging popularity of co-star Norman Reedus thanks to The Walking Dead surely helps it maintain a solid audience rep 2 decades on. This is one of those movies where if you don't already know, you'd probably never even guess that it was originally slated in the reviews. It's now just accepted as good, not even a hidden gem, just a genuinely great movie that people love, and rightly so.